Okay, so what we've got here is the November 2010 Unit 2 paper, and if we start on question 1, as you would, the key thing to look at question 1 is that it does say you need to use approximations. So what that means is immediately when you see an approximations question, you need to be rounding everything within the question to one significant figure. So that 98.7 becomes 100, 1.94 becomes 2, and then you're actually going to try and simplify what you've got there. So the square root of 100 becomes 10, 2 doesn't change, so 10 divided by 2 is 5, so your answer is going to be 5 for 2 marks. Question 2. If you're given something along the lines of an actual multiplication, like you do have here, usually what you should not do for this one is try and work out 23.5 times 6.4 using long multiplication or whatever grid method. The easiest thing to do is to compare that to what you originally have here. So you notice that 23.5 times 6.4 is very similar to 23.5 times 64. However, the 64 has been divided by 10, so that means my 1504 needs to be divided by 10, and my answer will be 150.4. Similarly, they've gone 1504 divided by 640. Again, that 640 is similar to 64, whereas 1504 is exactly the same. But the 64 has been multiplied by 10, so if you're dividing by a number that's made bigger, the answer you're going to get is smaller, so 23.5 needs to be 10 times smaller to compensate for it, so your answer is going to be 2.35. Now, these questions are fairly common, and what they like to do is they like to give you one like this, and then on the end, they'll give you 23.5 times 65, or they might have been 63. In this case, the best thing to do is, if 23.5 times 64 is 1504, to times it by 65, you just need to add 23.5 onto that, 1504, and your answer will be 1527.5. If we look at question 3, it tells you that the value of this algebraic sum is equal to minus 10. So the best thing to do here is to take the algebraic sum and multiply it out. So what I've got is x times y plus 2 equals minus 90. Now all I've done here is, because I can't quite solve it because it's not a simultaneous equation, I haven't got another x, I haven't got another y, it's not just an equation where it's just x on its own or just y on its own. So what I've done is I've said, well, if minus 9 times 10 equals minus 90, surely that means I can say x equals minus 9, and the y plus 2 bit can equal 10. So in that case, x would equal 9, and y would equal 8. Now that's just a possible pair. It's not the only possible pair. Of course, you could have had 10 and minus 9 the other way. You could have got minus 90 by doing 2 times minus 45, or 90 times 1. There's a myriad of answers for these, but this is the one I've gone for. If yours works, that's perfectly fine. Question 4. If you go through these questions logically, yes, you've got words, and we don't necessarily like words in maths. We just want to go ahead and, work with the numbers, play with the numbers. But what we're going to do here is you've got to pick out everything that you need. So 10 songs at ATP, which means 10 times ATP, she spent £8. Okay? The percentage that she spent means that, well, if I look here, I've spent £8 out of the 20 I had. So to convert a fraction to a percentage, you can do one of two things. Either just divide them and then times it by 100, or in this case, I know 20 can turn into 100 very quickly, and a fraction out of 100 is basically already a percentage, because percentage means out of 100. So times 20 by 5 to get 100, so the 8 scales up to 40, which means she's spent £40 of her voucher, 40%, of her voucher already. Question 5. The first one's very easy, of course. You just look at minus 1 plus 7, then divided by 2, and your answer should be 3, 1 mark. The next one's slightly trickier. If the output is equal to the input, I'd always go with algebra. So if I start with x, I must end with x. So then if I get myself a little formula, or an equation, you're going to get 5 times x, which is 5x, take away 6, which is minus 6. So 5x minus 6 equals what I ended up with, which is x. So 5x minus 6 equals x means I know I can move this x over to there. So I'm going to get 4x minus 6 equals 0. That 6 moves back to the other side. 4x equals 6. If 4x equals 6, that means I need to divide 6 by 4. So my answer is going to be equal to 1.5. Some people do like to try and guess these instead. If you try and guess it, you won't necessarily look at decimals. You'll probably try whole numbers, and it's not always going to work. So they're going to try and trick you here by putting decimals in, which they have. So it's best to do it algebraic instead. Now if we look at question 6, it is just a distance time graph. So the further right you go, the longer the time has elapsed, and the higher up you go, it means the further away you are from the start. Any flat points in a distance time graph means they're not moving. It doesn't mean they're not accelerating, it means literally they've stopped and they're not moving anywhere, they're not going any further, they're not going any closer. So how many minutes does Pat overtake Vicky? That's obviously when the Pat line goes in above the Vicky line, because that means she's now further away. So that would be around 49. So the answer should be 49 minutes. How far ahead is she when Pat starts again after a rest? Well, Pat's rest was here. So she would have started again round about here. So at this point, Pat was 5 kilometers away. Vicky was 6.8 kilometers away, which means the gap between them on the graph would be how far away the distance they are from each other, which means 6.8 minus 5 is going to be equal to 1.8. Question 7. If you get a ratio that you need to divide, if you have an amount you need to divide into a ratio, the best thing you need to do, add up the separate parts of the ratio. That gives you 20 in this case, which is give you the total parts of the ratio. Take the amount, divide it by the total parts of the ratio to figure out what one part is worth. So in this case, one part is worth 30. Now the ratio is 9 parts to 8 parts to 5 parts. So if one part is 30, I'm going to do 9 times 30, 6 times 30, 5 times 30 to find the actual amounts of those 9, 8 and 5 parts, which in this case would be 270, 180, 150. Now you'll notice with this question here it's got a star. Star questions, you get a mark for your logic and how you've actually written things out and set things up. And remember I said this is quite a wordy question. We don't necessarily like to read all the words, but it's very important to read everything that's there and not just jump straight into it with the first numbers you have. So read everything first before you try and do anything. So figure out what they want you to do before you actually need to do it. So first of all, I've noticed that 50 jars are sold before she reduces the price. First thing I did was 50 jars at £3 each means that there's £150 free jars. What she said was the price is reduced by 40%, so I'm trying to find what the 40% reduction from £3 is. So if £3 is obviously counting as 100%, 10% of £3 is 30p, so 40% would be £1.20. So 40% off means my new price is £1.20. Sorry, £1.80. So I take the £1.20 off the £3. A common mistake is that people find the percentage that comes off and then only use that as the new price as opposed to taking it off. So the new price is actually £1.80. Now that new price is applied to the last 30 jars. I know she's only got 30 jars left to sell because she had 80 to start with and she already sold 50. So 30 jars at £1.80 is £54. So the total amount she made, obviously, was £150 plus £54, so she made £204. But the question tells me here that it cost her £95 to make it. So the profit must be how much she take away how much she cost her to make it. So 204 minus 95 equals 109. Her target was £100, therefore, yes, she does meet her target. And she's very happy, as are you, because you've just got 5 marks. Question 9. Some nice easy algebra questions, including some indices and obviously some factorising ones. So x divided by 5 equals minus 6 times by 5, because it's the opposite of divided by 5, so my answer is x equals minus 30. For this question here, 4t minus 20, to factorise it, I take a 4 out, and that leaves me with t minus 5 inside. I can double check it works, because 4 times t is 4t, 4 times minus 5 is minus 20. If it has a question that says expand and simplify, first thing you have to do is expand the brackets, then simplify, just like it asks. So 3 times 2m is 6m, 3 times minus 4 is minus 12. 5 times m is 5m, 5 times 2 is plus 10. And notice I put the plus here because it was a plus 5 times m, so it should have been plus 5m. Then when you're combining it together, 6m and plus 5m becomes 11m, minus 12 plus 10 becomes minus 2. I've rewritten this one here because I couldn't really read it, but it's exactly the same thing that's in black as what the question was. So if you're having things multiplied together which have indices, remember the rule of indices. If it's got the same base and you're multiplying it together, you add the powers. So the first thing is 4 times 2 is 8. Now I've got g and I've got g cubed. Now if the g doesn't actually have a number, it means it was actually a 1. So g to the 1 times g to the 3 is g to the 1 plus 3, which makes g to the 4. Similarly, k squared times k cubed is going to be k to the 5. And those are your 2 marks there. Again, this is another factorized question, but it's worth 2 marks because you can take both a number and a letter out. In this case, I can take 5q out. If I take 5q, I'm left with 2q minus 3r inside. Okay, number 10. It shows you an addition pyramid, and the way it works is for the first one, 2 plus 4 gives you 6, 4 plus 5 gives you 9, then you get 6 plus 9 gives you the top one. They've now given you an empty algebraic one, and what you have to do is figure out kx at the top, so you need to find the coefficient of x. Remember, coefficient just means the number that is next to x in this case. So what I've done is I've labelled this box, box A, this box, box B. So I'm going to look at box A on its own. Box A is going to be x times x bracket x minus 4 plus the 4x. If I expand that bracket, I get x squared minus 4x, add the 4x, the minus 4x plus 4x will cancel out, which leaves me with just x squared on its own. I now look at box B. Box B is going to be 4x plus 6x minus x squared, which, if I expand it out, gives me 10x minus x squared. Now, quite obviously, but I've written it anyway, the top box must be equal to box A plus box B. So what I've done is, the top box is kx, box A is x squared, and box B is 10x minus x squared. So if I combine it all together in a single line like this, you notice that the x squared minus x squared cancels out, so you're left with kx equals 10x. So quite obviously, if they're equal to each other, then k must be equal to 10. Okay, when you have indices with a power, I'm just going to write in blue, in general, what the rule is, just in case. So if you have a to the m over n, that becomes the nth root of a, and then you do that to the power of m. So what we've done here, that's 27 to the 2 over 3, which means I need the cube root of 27, and then I'm going to square it. The cube root of 27 must be 3, because 3 times 3 times 3 is 27, and then I'm going to keep the squared there. So after I find the cube root of 27 is 3, I'm going to square it. 3 squared is 9. My answer is 9. Next question. Now, if this is a reverse percentage question, so the mistake a lot of people make is they find 10% of 108 and add it on. Now, if you do that, unfortunately, you're not going to be correct, because that's not what happened. If you think of it logically, his starting weight must have been 100% of his weight. He's lost 10%, which means his current weight is 90% of his original weight. So his 90% of the original makes 108. So what I do is I'm going to scale down from 90 to 10, because that's easy. And after I go to 10, I go to 100, because that's also easy. And that serves the purpose of actually finding out what his original weight was. So 90% of the original is 108. So 10% of the original must be 12, which means his original weight, which is 100%, must have been 120 kilograms. Now, you'll get questions like that which might be, it's increased rather than decreased. So you might say he's gone up by 10%. In that case, you'd say 110% equals whatever. Divide by 11 to get to 10, then times by 10 to get to 100. Very similar all the time. Question 13's got another star next to it, so it does give you a mark for your logic and how you're actually trying to work it out. So what I've done here is, we can't find the first term straight away. What we need to do is we need to figure out what this a value is before we can actually go backwards to find the first term. So to find the a value, basically what I've done is, to go from 12 to 52, this 12 must have had a subtracted from it, and then that must have been multiplied by 4. So if I look at it algebraically, I can write it like this: 4 bracket 12 minus a equals 52. Now the quick way of solving these, yes, you can expand it out and get 48 minus 4a equals 52 and then go on to solve it like that, but it can be quicker to just divide by 4. If I divide by 4, I'm just left with what's in the bracket, and then 52 divided by 4 is 13. If 12 minus a equals 13, that means a must have been minus 1. Once you know a is minus 1, it's very easy to work out the first term. Again, using algebra, because we all love algebra, I'm going to let x equal the first term. So in algebra terms, I'm going to have 4 bracket x plus 1 equals 12. Because if I'm taking away a minus 1, it becomes a plus 1, and this just means that first term is, having to subtract a then multiplied by 4, and it equals 12 because the second term is 12. If I expand that and solve it, it turns out that x equals 2. Question 14. If it says, show clearly that x plus 5 bracket x plus 5 times x minus 5 is equal to x squared minus 25. Please don't try and be clever and just say, oh, obviously it does because you can spot it. Physically expand that out. If you expand it out, you get x squared plus 5x minus 5x plus 25, and you can clearly show that 5x plus 5x cancels out, which does give you x squared minus 25, and then you've actually physically shown it. For part B, to simplify an algebraic fraction, the bottom is you've already done the bottom part because that was in the beginning, in part A. So the bottom clearly factorizes to x plus 5 and x minus 5. If you didn't get given that, you should spot that it's a difference of 2 squares, because x squared is a square term, 25 is a square term, so it becomes x plus 5 and x minus 5. Now the top one, with a little bit of trial and error, you would have figured out, hopefully, that it factorizes to 3x minus 4 and x minus 5. Now remember I told you in questions like this, it's very likely that a bracket on the top must be the same as a bracket on the bottom. So if you were stuck with what to actually factorize it to, you would have known that it would have either been x plus 5 times something, or it would have been x minus 5 times something, and you would have been able to make a good educated guess that actually this has to be 3x, and this would have had to be 3x, because the only way to get 3x squared is to get x times 3x, and the only way to get 20 would be, this number would have to be a 4. And then you would have tested it, because it's a plus 20. Do they have to both be the same sign? Yes, they do. So it's either that or that, and then that would have eliminated one or the other for you, and you would have clearly picked the correct one, and it simplifies down to what you've got there. 3x minus 4 over x plus 5. For question 15, if you're rearranging to make the subject, to make y the subject, it means you want everything to just be y equals. Now this is a harder example than normal, because y appears in 2 places. If y just appears in one place, it's fairly easy. All you've got to do is plus or minus and then divide to just get y on its own. However, if you ever get multiple of the same variable, what you want to do is this. First things first though, expand that bracket out. So I'm going to get 3y minus p equals 2h plus hy. After that, I want to get all the y's on one side and everything else on the other side. So what I've done is the plus hy has moved to the left to make minus hy, and minus p has been moved to the right hand side and becomes a plus p. So my line obviously reads 3y minus hy equals 2h plus p. Whenever you get multiple y's, you will always need this extra step. You will need to factorize to get the y on its own. The only way to get y on its own is to factorize it, so it becomes y bracket 3 minus h equals 2h plus p. And then you divide by the 3 minus h to get y equals 2h plus p all over 3 minus h. Question 16 requires a bit of thinking. We have done graphs. You are able to do graphs, but it's slightly different because it does need a bit of thinking, like I say. Now you can work out what point B is just by inspection, really. Point M means it's the midpoint. If it's in the middle, it means it's in the middle. So the gap from A to M is 2 to the right and 6 up, which means to go from M to the B, I need to go 2 right and 6 up again. So if I go 2 right and 6 up, it means that coordinate for B is 4, 13. Now it's telling me that C and B are level, and if C crosses the x-axis, is on the y-axis, it means the coordinate for C must be 0, 13. Once I know it's 0, 13, that helps me a lot, because if I use y equals mx plus c, remember c is where it crosses the y-axis. So now I know it crosses at 13. All I need is m. M is the gradient. For every 1 to the right, how far do I go up? And that's how you find m. So what I've just seen is that I go 2 to the right and 6 up, which means to go 1 right, I must go 3 up, which means my gradient is 3. Putting 3 and 13 into my y equals mx plus c equation gives me my answer of y equals 3x plus 13. Question 17 is a lovely surds question. It does involve some very difficult surds in terms of actually you've got to complete the square. Where you've got to rationalize the denominator. So what you do here, to rationalize the denominator, you multiply by root 3 over root 3. Because root 3 over root 3 is technically 1. If you multiply by 1, you're not changing 6 over root 3 at all. You're just changing the way it looks. So to multiply fractions, you multiply the tops, you multiply the bottoms. So 6 times root 3 is 6 root 3. Root 3 times root 3 on the bottom. Remember, the square root of something times the square root of the same something must just be that itself. So the bottom is going to be 3. So 6 root 3 divided by 3 equals 2 root 3. Now, root 75 needs to be simplified, and they've already given you a hint because it tells you it's in the form of something root 3. So straight away, I'm going to do 75 divided by root 3, which is 25 times 3, so 75 is 25 times 3. Happy coincidence that 25 is a square number, so the square root of 25 times 3 becomes 5 root 3. So that means I have 2 root 3 plus 5 root 3, which obviously equals 7 root 3. Now question 18. Question 18 is a question to almost think outside the box, but it's very logical. If you just follow it logically and work it out algebraically and do everything that it asks you to do, for these types of questions you can't go wrong if you just play with the algebra correctly. First of all, it says 2 integers have a difference of 3. So what I'm going to do is, one is n, and I'm going to let the other one equal n plus 3. If you want to, you could say one is n and the other one is n minus 3. It will get you the same answer. However, I would always prefer a plus 3 to a minus 3 because pluses are easier to play with, technically. So what's it saying here? The difference between the squares of the 2 integers is 3 times the sum of the integers. Okay. That can be a confusing sentence. It is a fairly confusing sentence, so break it down. So the difference between the squares of the 2 integers. So squares of the 2 integers. n plus 3 squared is one of the integers, and n squared would be the other integer. So I'm just going to square each thing separately. Bear in mind, remember, integer means whole number. So now because it wants the difference, I'm going to do one of them, take away the other one. Obviously, I do the bigger one first. I'm not going to do small minus big, I'm going to do big minus small. So what I've got, if I expand n plus 3 all squared out, I get n squared plus 6n plus 9, take away the n squared. So that simplifies to 6n plus 9 because the n squared disappears. I'm going to factorize 6n plus 9 to give me 3 bracket 2n plus 3. Then I'll look at the rest of what it says. So it says is 3 times the sum of the integers, okay? So that means I need to add the integers first and then times them by 3. So I've got n plus 3, which is that, and I'm timesing it by 3. n plus 3 is 2n plus 3, times it by 3, so I get 3 bracket 2n plus 3. At this point, because it asks you to prove it, you clearly see that 3 bracket 2n plus 3 is the same as 3 bracket 2n plus 3, which means both are the same, therefore it is always the same.